So I'm going to begin. I'm going to introduce my husband, Randy, the other owner, who's my partner and a gentleman farmer. He's going to give you a little background about Lobo and the vineyard that produces this wine. So, Randy.
So, hello. This concept of drinking wine at 3 o'clock, I'm all in. So, Pinot Noir, as many of you may know, that was actually the first wine that we made at Lobo many years ago. That was really for two reasons. The first was because it's my favorite varietal. It's just so darn delicious, and it's versatile. I like everything about it. The second reason, though, is because it's at least reputed to be one of the hardest wines to make. There are some winemakers who call it the heartbreak grape, and maybe Victoria can talk about that a little more as we get into this. But it's, to me, Pinot Noir is a challenge because I want the wine to be delicate, but I don't want it to be wimpy. And I want the wine to be firm and full, but I don't want it to be syrupy. And there's a real spectrum of Pinot Noir out there. There's some terrific ones and there's some absolutely horrible ones. And so anyway, I thought was, if we can make Pinot Noir, we can make anything. And so that's another reason why we started with Pinot Noir. The vineyard where this fruit comes from is in what I'm going to call true Napa Valley. All I mean by that, without aspersions being cast, is that it's not Carneros. Most people associate any Pinot Noir that comes from the Napa area as being from Carneros, which is closer to the North Bay with a lot cooler climate, a lot of bay breezes at night. Ours is, however, grown in another appellation called the Oak Knoll District. It's further north. It's about halfway between Yountville and Napa, right in the center of the valley floor. And obviously, we at least believe that you can produce world-class Pinot Noir from that area. There are only, to my knowledge, 3 wineries in the entire Napa Valley that make what I'm going to call a true Napa Valley Pinot Noir. And we're one of them. So in that respect, I guess we're a bit of a maverick operation on the Pinot. But we'll let all of you be the judge. To me, this fruit produces an uncommonly bright and rich Pinot Noir, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And the reason why the Pinot Noir is so darn good is because of the woman who's going to speak next, who is our winemaker. If you're all smart about wine, and of course you are, you wouldn't be on this phone call, then the person you want to hear from the most is the winemaker. And Victoria Coleman has been working with us, fortunately, for 12 vintages now. She's UC Davis enology educated. She's trained at Chateau Mouton Rothschild. Her pedigree is almost as wonderful as she is a person. And so we're so fortunate to have her. She's the magician behind the curtain and the one that produces this extraordinary Pinot Noir. So, Victoria?
Thank you, Randy. And thank you to everyone who's taken their time to join our chat and our tasting. So as Randy mentioned, these grapes are grown in the Oak Knoll district, which I think it was Steve Mathiasen who said Oak Knoll is like the mouth of the Napa Valley. And so we're in the southernmost portion of the valley, and we get a nice influence from the San Pablo Bay. So it allows for maybe a longer ripening period because it's not as warm as you proceed up valley. And so it kind of makes it so that that sub-appellation grows everything pretty well, in addition to the soils, which are like, and Randy, you can kind of correct me, but like a gravelly, sandy loam, maybe.
Yeah.
And that's a rich soil, which also grows everything really well. So we kind of have to pay attention to the vigor of the vines and try to do things to negate that. But so that kind of makes it hard in a sense for the Pinot. We have to find a window at which where the sugars and the acids are like in sync, the flavors, because basically when we pick, it's picking by the flavors, although we do pay attention to what's going on chemistry wise in the vineyard. So for 2016, in that growing season, it was a really nice even keel growing season. We didn't have any heat spells, which I dread. I remember 2013 was my first vintage of making the Pinot Noir, and I didn't want that task because I know how much Randy loves his Pinot, and I was only making the cabs at that time, and I remember one time making the cab, I thought, he's gonna fire me this year when we had that horrible, we had horrible rain in 2010 up at Atlas Peak. So having that and then moving into the Pinot where it's like, that's the baby of the bunch, the grapes that we were growing. But going back to 2016, nothing eventful happened. We had rain in October, I think it was, that had come in, but everything, I think as far as July, August was pretty even, nothing to stress about. We had probably a longer hang time for that reason, so we could pick maybe up to a week later for these grapes. And we can move into the wine, which is a beautiful garnet color. And you get a lot of freshness. You get the red fruit, like the red cherry. You get some floral notes and freshness of like rose stems, maybe. There's a greenness to it that's not overpowering, but very fresh. And then on the palate, you still have that strawberry, raspberry red fruit. And you also get a hint of maybe like an orange citrus zest. The tannins are super, it's a juicy wine, but the tannins are very soft, they're very round, and there's a nice, spiciness on the finish, but there's also a nice, like, are those Werther's, the toffee candies? There's a nice like toastiness of that also on the finish. And the acidity in this vineyard, we always have great acidity in the wines, low pHs, so you do feel the freshness from the acidity of the wines.
One thing that might be worth mentioning is that some of you may be wondering why we're only on the 2016 in 2020. There are an awful lot of people out there that are selling the 2018 Pinots right now. And again, it was a difficult lesson for me, but the first time we made Pinot Noir, about a year, I want to say more than a year after it had been barreled, I tasted it, and honestly, my reaction was, who stole my wine? It even after a year, it still tasted shocked. It tasted a little astringent, and it just took that long. And so one of the things we really try to do is hold the Pinot back and really let it both barrel and bottle age sufficiently so that it's really ready to be consumed. You could lay this wine down for 5 or 10 years easily, but you could also enjoy it this evening.
And I agree with you on that, of course. I remember tasting early on and realizing that the wine needed some bottle age to it before it was approachable, I guess, or it showed itself as Pinot. because it can be a bigger and more savory style of Pinot, drinking it early on. I think with the 2016, even though that's like now we're in this pattern of releasing a little bit later, I feel like it's probably one of the first wines that we've released as far as the Pinot goes, where it's actually ready to drink. Whereas even we've had to release it maybe the year prior, and we held it back, but it was still a bigger Pinot.
Many of you know that the Pinot has blue eyes, and I know Randy asked me to talk a little bit about that. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Blue eyes came into our thought pattern because wolves are born with blue eyes, and then their eyes change color. And so since it was our first baby, we decided to give it the blue eyes. And then you'll see in the next lesson, next chats that we have amber eyes for the cabs, and Rosé has a silver eye, and the Chardonnay has a yellow or gold eye. So it's kind of the eyes habit here for Lobo wines, and that's how we like to keep the brand. And hopefully people will enjoy seeing them on the table or seeing them in a restaurant, and get a good glimpse, because it's a very unique label. Our younger son, who's a graphic artist, designed that label, and we're very proud of it. The Howl was a blend that Victoria came to make, trying to figure out what we could do with some overage between some Syrah and some Cabernet right across the road from each other, and turned out to be a very favorite wine. So hopefully we'll get a chance at some point to do a tasting for that as well. So I haven't seen any chat, any questions or comments. Does anybody have a question or a comment? Anything else you'd like to know about the wine that you don't already know?
Let me jump in, and for those of you that are into the more technical side, this wine comes from, there are lots of clones and lots of rootstock choices for every varietal, but this wine comes from what I would consider to be a particularly classic combination of clones. One's called the Martini clone that was used in clonal trials in Carneros, and the other one is Mariafeld. There's 15 and 23 are the two clones, and they're especially, I think, popular and effective in making champagne, and as a result, I think we've got a great combination, if you will. We recently planted a third clone that came from some time that Chris and I spent up in Oregon in the Willamette Valley, and we were so impressed with at least some of the Pinot Noirs up there, and in particular wines made from another clone, clone 115. So we've experimentally planted a few rows of that and have introduced that into later Pinot Noirs. I think the 2016 may be the last one that does not contain clone.
Right.
I'm gonna try and
Correct.
share screen. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. So Victoria, anything else? How about what's the alcohol percentage in this wine?
I believe it's 14.1. Let me look. Actually, it's 14.1. I've been trying to get them to 14 or below. So having that included in my decision as far as when to pick, but that's a difficult thing because when you're picking by what tastes good, and you do have to keep in consideration the sugar content of the grapes, as well as the acid and just the phenolics, what you're feeling when you're tasting. But 14.1.
So some of you may also pay attention to scores. It's such a personal thing, you know. Some people are not only disinterested in scores, but are offended that people mention them. And then other people, whether they admit it or not, are somewhat guided by them. In our business, we have to pay attention to them, even though some of them are more suspect than others, to put it kindly. this wine was recently given 90 points in a very effusive review from James Suckling, who is one of the most prominent wine critics in the world and also a tough grader. So we know it's not rocket fuel.
So Victoria, questions come in and says, what bricks is the Pinot harvested at? What bricks? Talk a little bit about bricks.
Probably between 23 to 24, which is kind of, it gets me to probably where I'd like to be. I've come in higher and I'm still learning the fruit after, I mean, even since 2013, I'm still learning the fruit, but I picked a little bit higher. So
and bricks is what, the sugar? Bricks is what, the level of sugar?
It's the concentration of sugar. And so I'm trying to, it's hard to like I said, to pick out a level to which will give you the alcohols that you want. But since we're picking by flavors, we can go higher. We can easily get into 24.5 to 25. And 24 is even like, it's probably like my limit for cab, what I would like. But trying to bring it down, and I'm hoping that one day Randy's going to allow me to do one pick that I can just solely pick and pay attention to the bricks and flavors, but bricks for alcohol purposes, and then pick by flavors and see what that combination gives.
Well, I hope you go with a little high
content, and Pinot Noir, again, it can get hot. Literally, it can get too alcoholic if you lose track of it. You have to pick it at almost exactly the right time, especially if you have one of those heat spikes, as we seem to more frequently than not get in September. Your bricks can go up a couple of points in a day if you're not just absolutely on top of it. So again, the bottom line is that I used to go out in the vineyard with my refractometer, and I'd measure the bricks just to the decimal point. And then Victoria would go through the vineyard and pop berries in her mouth and tell me whether it was ready. And basically what I learned is listen to Victoria.
So, Randy, this might be a good question for you. Stephanie asked, what's happening at the caves at the winery?
A lot still. It seems like the project that almost like the Winchester Mystery House, we don't seem to be able to finish it, but we're close. For those of you that haven't visited the winery, first, shame on you. You should, but probably you're better off waiting until the summer. The caves, for those of you that haven't visited, is a 20,000 square foot facility that we partly own. It's all bored into the mountaintop. And so the entire operation is underground. And we've been making wine there for several years, but we had to go through a second round of financing in order to complete what I'll call the second half of it. So we've been functioning in 10,000 feet, and we're just finishing off now the second 10,000 square feet, which means adding a formal tasting room, a caterer's kitchen. There will be a banquet facility, a lot of the more conventional amenities that would come with what I think safely characterize as a trophy winery. The other thing that we've been trying for 2 years to do is get the county to allow us to take our visitors out the back patio, where the views are basically drop dead gorgeous. Honestly, I do not know of a winery in the Napa Valley that has more dramatic views than we have from the back patio of our caves. And yet the county, well, it's just been a struggle, to put it kindly. But we're whisper close. We're about to get those permits as well. I expect to be completely done with construction up there by June, which coincidentally is probably about the same time Chris and I are going to finally move into the house we've been rebuilding up on Atlas Peak.
So Victoria, what about this year's harvest?
What about it?
What do you think? And when do you think it's going to happen with all of this that's going on now? I know the wineries are still in production because the agriculture is considered an essential during this time, but
I
do you
mean, I
think
think
it's going to
everything,
impact harvest?
I think that everything, I mean, we have to harvest the grapes. We have the staff to do it. I think for me, I was worried about bottling when we bottled the rosé and the Pinot just recently. And since we have the mobile units coming in and having people to staff that were willing to be, maybe right at 6 feet apart. But I think that it's very early to tell about the crop. We didn't get as much rainfall as we'd like to have had, for the vines, for the grounds, but probably will produce, just giving up just with a normal flowering season, and hopefully we'll have nice warm weather in the spring. That won't affect the flowering, so we'll have, what we typically have as far as the number of tons coming in to the winery. But we're still functioning. The guys are there working every day. We don't have a large staff, so that's another good thing. We're kind of offset with the other brands. We schedule our work apart from one another all the time, so it makes it easy with what's happening, coming up.
Some of you may not be aware of that, but we sell a lot of our Pinot Noir. That's true of several of our varietals. We sell a lot of our Cabernet. We've been selling it to Pine Ridge and the Prisoner. We sell a lot of Syrah and Chardonnay to Lewis Cellars, to Randy Lewis. But we also sell Pinot Noir to Mum, and they use it for sparkling wine. Pretty much every year, Mum comes in and says, we want everything. And every year we tell them, you can't have everything. There are certain rows that we know we love, and so we keep those for ourselves.
Any other questions or comments?
The grapes look really good. Randy's ahead of the season.
Yeah.
So that's one other thing I could ask you, Victoria, because I haven't actually been out to the vineyard. I'm sort of hunkered down up here on the hill. We definitely have bud break already, correct?
Oh, yeah. Because just being up, was that last Friday I was there. So the vines they grow so quickly, but we had little tiny baby shoots up on Atlas Peak like that. And that's like the last thing to probably push in the cab. So
what about a Salvador and the Pinot?
There needs to be a little bit of work done, but yeah, that's advanced more so than the cab, but everything is got some growth on it. So it's time to get in there and remove some shoots that don't belong.
I have a question.
Okay, there we go.
Victoria, you talked a little bit about weather in past years. Baloptimo and suboptimal. I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about, like, in general, what are your big concerns, or what are the big advantages when you have, like, what would be a good year versus a bad year when it comes to weather, and how that affects the grapes?
I feel like over the past few years, it's been warmer. So before where we're located, where the vineyard's located on Atlas Peak, I feel like sometimes we're at that fog line. So we have a cooler ripening season. And I feel in the past couple years, we've been able to get greater maturity in those vines up there. So I'm grateful for that. But then we also don't have a lot of water. So that's a little scary. I think it's unfortunate because we had the fires in 2017, but in 2017, we also had a heat spell before that had happened, and we lost all of our Petit Verdot for blending. It's still cool enough on the valley floor here at the Salvador vineyard to where that vineyard holds out pretty well. So you can do, like, I like to go in and pick when the fruit is more on the fresh flavor side of things, but you have, the fresh flavor portion of it. And then last year, I had the opportunity, because we took on more cab outside of the initial pick that I'd done, and we had some heat summation in that vineyard at that time, and so I ended up picking a little more ripe than I would, but it made a nice balance. I think we're good. The Pinot I worry about, as far as, you know, getting warmer in that Salvador vineyard. Not so worried about Atlas Peak, except not having the water for it. But just considering where we're sitting up on Atlas Peak, because we've always had like more earthy wines, less of the jammy. We don't typically get jam up there, but we're getting a little more ripe in the fruit up there because of what we're not looking forward to having, but it's warming up.
So that question was from our son, Ryan, and his wife, Marcy. He's our oldest son, and he's the biologist, so he keeps me tethered to the truth about wolves and what's going on with the biology. But another question came in, Victoria, from Jim Hogue. He asked you to compare some of the last 3 or 4 vintages of Pinot. How do you feel about how they compare to each other?
Well, I think we've had riper years. I know that 2014 was a warmer vintage. 2013 probably even so, but still a nice even ripening to that. 15, I know that we had, it didn't harm, well, somewhat it did, but because we sell most of the grapes to Mum for the Pinot, but we had, at flowering, we had a loss. So I think we were down maybe 25% on the valley floor for the Pinot. And I think the difference is just really the heat and trying just to pick at the right time. That's always a challenge, just like throughout. Just trying to find the right time to pick. And so differences, I think just warmer earlier than 16. We've had that happen. Just a warmer growing seasons up until 16.
So I'm going to make 2 comments. First, I want to say hi to Jim because I haven't talked to him in a while, but we go back a long ways. So I'm glad you're on the line, Jim. Thanks for joining us. And secondly, you can tell when you listen to Victoria how she's not just talking to you about the winemaking process, she's talking to you about the farming process. And believe me, there are a lot of winemakers here in Napa who have achieved true prima donna status and won't go out in the vineyards at all. It's like, just bring us the fruit, we'll make the wine for you kind of thing. Whereas one of the things I really appreciate about Victoria's approach is that she gets that it starts in the vineyard, and she has a tremendous amount of knowledge about the growing of the fruit, not just making of the wine. A friend of ours, a fellow named Michael Salacci, who works at Opus One, said something that really stuck with me when I first got started farming. And we were talking about soil amendments in the vineyard, and he said, the most important thing to put on your vineyard is your boots. It always stuck with me, and it's so true.
So Victoria, another question came in from Stephanie. Do you irrigate to mitigate the losses of water during the season?
Maybe more so on Atlas Peak. Down on the Salvador vineyard, not so much. We're mainly trying to just stay ahead of the heat spells. And so that's when we would typically look for water, look for watering the vines, but not necessarily. Usually we get enough, I think, rainfall typically to start out the growing season and get through to veraison. And then when we have the heat spells, veraison, so that's color changing, like getting into that ripening process. But we just try to stay ahead of the heat spells mainly with the water.
That's the interesting point there, though, when you talk about the warmth at that Salvador vineyard, is that most of the winemakers and vintners in the Napa Valley very much watch and listen to the scientists on climate change, because we are very sensitive to the fact that if we get a huge heat spike in the next 10 years, we might not be able to grow Pinot Noir at that vineyard. So we're watching that and studying it and staying on top of the science as best we can. And we do believe that climate change has an impact, and we do follow it. Anything else, anybody? We're just so glad that you all came. Does anybody else? Randy, do you have something else to say?
Well, before we sign off, of course, we want to thank everybody for their support of the brand and joining us. So, because it really is fun for us. But secondly, I want to make a plug for next Wednesday, because next Wednesday if I recall correctly, we shift from Pinot Noir to Cabernet Sauvignon, which is my second favorite varietal. It's going to be especially fun because, as some of you know, we recently received all of our wines get critical acclaim, and we're proud of that. But recently, what we call our Napa Valley Cab, which comes from our Valley Floor vineyard, was recognized by Decanter magazine as the highest rated Cabernet Sauvignon in California, period. And they reviewed over, I think it's over 200 California cabs before they came to that conclusion, and we agree with it. But for someone in our position here in the Napa Valley to get that kind of recognition and be featured on the cover of Decanter, Victoria flew back to London and presented our wines at 67 Pall Mall, which is one of the most prestigious wine clubs in the world. And that kind of recognition really fuels us to stay at what we're doing and just commit everything to the best possible wine. And that particular vintage that was reviewed was, however, it sold out in about a nanosecond after the reviews came in. But we're going to be talking next week about the immediately successive vintage, the 2016, and it's also really good.